You're watching France 24. This is live from Paris, joined in the studio by Matthew from the business desk with all the business stories. Good morning, Matthew.
Hi, Luke.
The French government, later this Friday, is presenting its budget for the next year. Not going to be that much good news in there, is there?
No, France is looking to make savings of 30 billion euros to get its budget deficit under control. Now, that's made even harder by a flat economy. And France's statistics agency, INSEE, has announced this morning, in fact, that there was no growth in the second quarter. Well, one measure in this budget that we'll see today is that 75% tax on people earning more than €1 million. But that's only going to make a small dent in the problem. It'll affect around 2,000 to 3,000 people. François Hollande has already said that these savings will be made from 20 billion euros worth of extra taxes and 10 billion euros of spending cuts. Well, French Prime Minister Jean-Marc Ayrault has been explaining why getting the deficit under control is so important.
If we give up our aim to cut 3% of the public deficit by 2013, then straight away interest rates will rise and we'll be in the same position as Italy or Spain. I don't want that. I want to stop this drifting debt.
Now, France's budget isn't the only one we've been watching at this end of this week. Spain also presented its own round of spending cuts on Thursday.
Yes, that's right. And Spain has even deeper cuts to make to reach its budget deficit target. And that's against a backdrop of increasing social unrest.
As Madrid tries to smooth the way to an international bailout, it's let itself in for a bumpy ride at home. Thursday's announcement of economic reform was preceded by days of sometimes violent anti-austerity protests. As many Spaniards feared, the new budget has brought new cutbacks. The plan for 2013 will aim to rake in 40 billion euros in wage freezes, tax rises and structural reforms, with ministry spending scaled back by an average of around 10%. The programme will also see public sector pay frozen for the third consecutive year, the creation of an independent authority to monitor government finances, and a 20% tax on substantial lottery wins. There was a faint glimmer of good news, though.
The items that will increase in the next budget will be retirement pensions and also grants.
The lean 2013 budget seen as preparing the way for Madrid to formally ask for a bailout from the IMF and EU. That would trigger a bond-buying programme from the ECB and ease Madrid's borrowing costs. With 1 in 4 workers unemployed and the country slipping further into recession, the economic reforms may court skittish investors but will heap more hardship on Spain's crisis-wary population.
Well, staying with budgets, and the Greek finance minister has said that a deal has been reached on new austerity measures for the country. They need to make spending cuts of 11.5 billion euros to free up a 31 billion euro loan instalment that the country needs. Well, those measures are likely to be presented to Greece's lenders on Monday before getting approval from Parliament.
Quite a lot of news there coming in, especially from the Eurozone. How have the markets been reacting this morning?
Markets broadly positive this morning. Take a look at what's been going on in Asia, and we'll see that most markets there are up this morning. That's with the exception of the Nikkei, down almost 1% there, and I can tell you why. There's disappointing data on industrial output out of Japan. Fell more than expected in August. It was down 1.3% on the previous month and 4.3% on the previous year, and that was much worse than had been expected. However, over in the US, markets were in a better mood yesterday at the close, all of them finishing up. The Nasdaq there managing 1.4%.
Moving to news here in France, and the fate of a very large steel plant in the east of the country. It was a big issue during the election that we had earlier in the year. Not looking too good for the people that work there now.
Oh, that's right, Luke. And this is ArcelorMittal, which looks set to close the furnaces at its Florange plant. That will put over 500 jobs at risk. And yesterday, the French President, François Hollande, met the company's head, Lakshmi Mittal. Well, Mittal himself is getting criticism for earlier promises he made about the company's operations here in France.
A big smile and an avalanche of promises. Shown here at the start of 2006, Indian oil magnate Lakshmi Mittal had just launched a hostile takeover of Arcelor. It was deeply unpopular in France, and Mittal needed to give reassurance. He said then that no employees would be laid off due to his bid, and that he would honour all the company's commitments. Even before the takeover, Arcelor had been planning to close the plant at Florange in northeast France in 2010, but Lakshmi Mittal held to his commitments and kept it open. Fast forward to a year ago and the fires burn in Florange no longer, and the plant's employees have been technically laid off. ArcelorMittal blames the European crisis for the decline of demand for steel, but a recently published report produced by experts from the French Economic Ministry puts more blame on the company. The report blames short-sighted strategy rather than long-term planning for the problems. Since 2007, ArcelorMittal's European investment has been diminishing. Worse, 80% of that investment has been pumped into keeping the company going, and only 20% represents investment for growth. The report's authors conclude that the Florange site is still viable. No comment yet from ArcelorMittal.
Well, now let's get some more of the day's company news. And the European Union says that the US should pay for illegal subsidies to aircraft maker Boeing. It wants the World Trade Organization to impose up to $12 billion a year in sanctions. The move is the latest in a 12-year battle. Boeing claims European governments have given billions of euros to Airbus.
Heineken has succeeded in its takeover of the maker of Tiger beer. The Dutch brewer has been battling to take control of Asia-Pacific breweries. Shareholders in the parent company of APB have voted to accept Heineken's offer. It's paying $4.6 billion for a 40% stake.
And the maker of BlackBerry phones has reported a smaller than expected loss. Research in Motion said it lost $234 million in the 3 months to August. The company sold 7.4 million BlackBerry smartphones. That was lower than forecast. RIM has 10% of the smartphone market.
Now, in other news, we all complain often about the postal service, but Costa Rica, they've got an even more serious problem than perhaps the day-to-day worries we have here.
Yes, that's right. I was amazed when I read this, but that there are no street signs, apparently, in the capital of Costa Rica, San Jose. That makes everything, of course, from postal delivery to taking a taxi, very difficult for the 2.5 million people who live there. But now the city, as we can see in these pictures, is installing some street signs. And it has an economic cost as well. The losses due to undelivered mail alone is apparently estimated at around $700 million a year. Well, this postal worker explains the problem.
We distribute approximately 28 million letters every year. That's more or less the average of how much mail traffic we manage. We've conducted studies that show that approximately 40% of those 28 million have incorrect addresses, with laughable, quaint addresses that make it impossible for the mailman to deliver the item.
And finally, very briefly, we've got an interesting novel way to sweeten a deal between Russia and Venezuela.
That's right. So a consortium of Russian companies spending about $20 billion on investing in energy in Venezuela. A very big deal. But I thought it was interesting that the deal was sweetened with the gift of a puppy for the Venezuelan leader, Hugo Chavez. It's a 3-month-old black terrier puppy, and apparently it's a gift from the president himself, Vladimir Putin. How cute.
Perhaps very, very sweet, perhaps ahead of that presidential election in Venezuela, that perhaps that will be of some interest to him there. Thanks all we've got time for in this business bulletin. Thank you very much, Matthew. More news and headlines here at Live from Paris at France 24 with Lorna after the break. Do stay tuned.